So, folks, there's a country. This country's name is Vuvuzela, okay? It's right here. It's on the tippy top South America. It's called Vuvuzela. You might have heard of it. We talk a lot about Vuvuzela in America. Mostly conservatives talk about it as like a place America should not emulate in any respect whatsoever, right? Right next to it, there's a country called Guyana. All right. So we've got Vuvuzela and the Guyana. They're right next to each other. Now, one thing to note about this relationship is that Vuvuzela has typically had some of the highest oil reserve, like largest oil reserves on the planet, some of the highest oil production on the planet. However, their economy has been terrible for a number of years due to a number of different reasons. One of the predominant ones being just colossal mismanagement, and basically making their economy like a one commodity thing. Typically, when we're talking about international, nation building, you don't want to, you don't really want to build your entire economy on one resource. Because if something internationally happens, like another country, say, floods the market with said resource, your entire economy suddenly becomes relatively worthless. And that's bad, generally speaking, economically. Venezuela is one of those countries that has been hit very, very hard by building their economy predominantly on oil. This is a problem that also just completely tanked the economy of Yugoslavia. It's a common refrain throughout all of history. Yes, the Vuvuzela was a bit. It was a bit, guys. But then you have Venezuela. Now, Venezuela just hasn't really adapted its economy. Like, there have been attempts made over the years, but primarily it's still a one-resource economy. The difference that kind of sets it apart from countries that fell apart, like Yugoslavia, is that Venezuela has large enough oil reserves that even like with it being horribly mismanaged, even with economic downturns in regards to the price of oil, it can still manage to limp along, albeit not well. And that kind of becomes an issue when it comes to its relationship with Guyana. Now, Guyana, as you might notice, is much smaller than Venezuela, okay? Which also plays into a number of other factors. One thing to keep in mind about Venezuela is that Venezuela has a standing military of over 100,000. I believe it's close to 110 to 130,000, depending on if they call up reservists. Whereas Guyana has a military approximately the size of the high school I went to growing up. That is like 4,000-ish members of its military. Now, this is a problem primarily because of one spot, and it's a place in Guyana called Essequibo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. However, the reason this area between Guyana and Venezuela is contested is largely due to colonialism. Surprise, surprise. Who could have guessed it would be colonialism? However, what the issue is here is that Essequibo used to be part of Venezuela when it was a colony. However, after the colonial period, international rulings led to Venezuela essentially ceding Essequibo to Guyana. It's largely a gigantic forest, rainforested region. It wasn't seen as being particularly valuable. To give you kind of you in the United States a point of reference, this is about the size of Florida right here. So when you know it, there have been a couple of things going on here regarding Essequibo and Venezuela and Guyana, which led to what just happened today. Venezuelans approve a referendum to claim sovereignty over a swath of neighboring Guyana. Essentially, Venezuela held a massive referendum to decide whether or not the country should just annex Essequibo. And the people who turned out to vote voted yes. However, there are some stories now being like, well, a lot of people didn't turn out to vote, but I'm going to tell you something, guys. That doesn't matter when it comes to a relatively authoritarian country like Venezuela. It doesn't matter that much if people stayed home to protest vote, because they still got primarily what they wanted. The Venezuelan government was able to get this referendum passed, which is what they are going to use as like a propagandistic tool to justify their annexation of Essequibo. So this is not great in terms of the stability of the region and, not just invading other countries in South America. Now, there are a number of outlets reporting on this over the last several days. One of them being Daily Express, which is a news outlet based out of Trinidad, which, if you remember looking at the map here, you'll note Trinidad and Tobago very close to Venezuela, so they kind of have an ear on the ground in that respect. But the Venezuelan army sets up near border amid today's Essequibo vote. So basically, the Venezuelan army has... It's not just like Venezuela's posturing in order to, get what it wants, politically at home. It appears that the Venezuelan military is taking steps to also potentially invade Guyana. On top of that, there are a number of other moves that are just kind of validating that other countries close and in the know, who have like a dog in the fight, as it were, are taking steps because they are expecting military action between Venezuela and Guyana. Notably, Brazil has called up its military to the northern border, basically to make sure there's not spillover into Brazil, and which would be another indicator for all of us that essentially Venezuela has very real and tangible plans towards trying to annex Essequibo, even if it means violence. Venezuela was dealing with horrible runaway inflation in the recent years. Yes, correct. That's largely because a lot of Venezuela's like social projects and like infrastructure projects and basically everything in their economy was pegged to oil prices. And due to mismanagement, due to, not diversifying their economy, their entire economy kind of got messed up by global oil prices, along with the fact that like the United States gives them a hard time. It's a combination of both of those things, as well as again, domestic mismanagement. But yeah, I mean, like even Guyana is like, yeah, there's a decent possibility here. Guyana will stay on alert after Venezuela vote on territorial dispute. So yeah, let's see here. This is according to their vice president, Bharat Jagdeo. And you might be wondering to yourselves, hey, why does this article talk about the potentially oil-rich Essequibo region? Well, as you might imagine, a country whose entire economy is predicated on oil production and large oil reserves kind of needs more and more oil in order to keep its economy running at least long enough to potentially diversify into other natural resources, other commodity production. And it turns out that Guyana has basically been going through a modern day gold rush. Basically, they've been discovering oil fields left and right, like to the extent where like there is it is one of the most oil rich places on the planet, and it was just discovered like within the last couple of years. Yeah. Yeah, they are poised to become the world's fourth largest offshore oil producer, placing it ahead of Qatar, the United States, Mexico, and Norway. It is like economically could be huge for Guyana. And also something to note here, if I was wise enough to bring up the map, is that there are more and more of these discoveries. This is from this article is from May of this year. This article is from October of this year. Essentially, they are continuing to discover massive new oil reserves and oil fields basically every time they're looking at, oh, could there be oil over there? Yep. Turns out, yep, there's a lot of oil around there. Let me just take a look here. Yeah, the Lancet Fish 2 results mark the fourth offshore oil discovery in the country this year and brings the total number of discoveries from 2015 to date to 46 for more than 11 billion barrels of recoverable oil and gas. That is colossal. Yeah, and the 6.6 million acre block is expected to generate up to 1.2 million barrels of oil and gas per day by 2027, which is terrible for the environment, by the way. Don't get me wrong, but we're talking about in the short term, and also when it comes to a discovery like this. Guyana is not a wealthy country by any means. Like, the discovery that they are sitting on natural resources worth tens of billions of dollars at least is immeasurable. Like, the amount that they could do for their people with a discovery of this size is almost incalculable, which in turn makes it a very attractive target for Venezuela. And you might be thinking, well, maybe Venezuela will cave to kind of some third party. Some third party will come in and make a difference here. See if I can pull up the map here. Well, it turns out, no. Basically, as part of the referendum, the Venezuelan people, again, most of whom stayed home, have rejected the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction to oversee the dispute with Guyana, basically rejecting a diplomatic solution to this, and just saying, either we're going to fight them and take it, or we're just going to take it. This is not ideal, to say the least. And let's see if we can find a map here of this. Yeah. So basically, by taking over, if you kind of compared this map to this one, they also take over the coastal territory of this area. They take over the coastal claims of Essequibo. which in turn would basically allow them to take a not insignificant amount of these offshore oil claims. Potentially like half of the offshore oil claims, along with any oil that might be potentially underneath Essequibo itself, which is it seems very likely that there is an ungodly amount of oil underneath the Guianan soil as well. So like this is a war over not just like the land itself, but an incalculable amount of wealth buried under the waters of Essequibo as well as the land itself. Yeah, I by the way, I would expect that if you see some ML tanky leftists talking about this, they're going to be doing some wild mental gymnastics in order to justify this act of aggression against Guyana. I'm guessing their argument is going to be something along the lines of like Venezuela has a right to its original borders before it was carved up by the international interests. So yeah, I expect that, but I need you all to understand that primarily what this is about a massive oil rush that is happening within Guyana that Venezuela wants and to an extent kind of needs to take in order to keep its economy limping along.